So I want you to think about where you're from. Now, what is the environment like where you're from? What kind of animals do you find there? For example, maybe in Finland, we got snow, ice, cold environment, and as a result, we find animals that can adapt and live in such environments, plants that can live and adapt to such environments. What about, for example, here? What's the environment like here? This is probably like Egypt. Here we can find deserts, really dry, warm places. And as a result, what animals can live there? We got camels. They're able to live with low water for long periods of time, hike for long periods of time. We got meerkats as well. So how about here? This is obviously an ocean. What we have there is water. Lots and lots of water. So creatures that we'll find there could be turtles, sharks, whatever that is, even orcas, right? And the reason being why these creatures can survive in these environments is because of specific characteristics that they have that allows them to adapt to this environment, unlike other creatures. For example, you'll never in your life find a wolf living in the ocean, or a meerkat living in snow. You know, like there's a reason why you only find specific creatures in specific places in the world. Now, there is one exception, and that is humans. So I'm going to use this country here, South Africa, as an example to represent all cities, all places where it is not natural anymore, where buildings were made and technology has taken over. So that's pretty much everywhere where there's major cities and all that. So for example, here's a good picture. So we can see there's lots of buildings. It's unnatural. It's been innovated. And as a result, what we find there is humans. You can think any place in the world where there's buildings, you're gonna find humans. And the reason for that is because that we're the only creatures on the planet that don't adapt to our environments. We adapt our environment to suit us. Think about it. The only way this camel will survive is by being suited for its environment, being strong enough, fit enough, or whatever, being the right creature. That does not apply for us. The reason why we can exist all over the planet, despite the extreme different environments, is because we can change the environment to suit our needs. We make buildings, we make clothes. And in a way, that's a good thing because we can survive in many places. We're intelligent. But at the same time, we destroy our environment. We're making living conditions impossible for creatures that live in other areas. Okay, so just that's something to bear in mind. And that brings up the whole topic ecology, because ecology is the study of different ecosystems and the animals within them. All of these are different ecosystems. This is like a desert, different ecosystem compared to the ecosystem here. All that an ecosystem is the environment and the creatures that live in that environment. It's the study of the creatures that live in specific environments. That's all that ecology is. It's actually really, really interesting to know about all these creatures and how they're adapted to live in all these circumstances. Now, for the IB, there is 4 important words that you need to know, and that is species, population, community, and ecosystem. You've probably heard this if you already had your class, and you may think it's quite easy. Yeah, I think it is easy, but you need to understand that you need to know the definition by word, because it's very easy to think you understand the definition when you actually don't. For example, do you recognize this image here? This image is from Lion King, the animated movie. Just look at the image for a second and think about what you're actually seeing, okay? And we'll see how these 4 words fit into this picture. So what is species to you? Most people think species is any organism that looks unique compared to others. For example, we know that a lion and an elephant is not the same species, right? That's true, they're not the same species, but we think, for example, you might think they're different species because they look different. In this case, it's true, they do look different. But what definition makes it true that they're not the same species. So the very definition of species is organisms that can reproduce to make fertile offspring. And I'll break this down because this is very, very important. So it's a group of organisms that can interbreed. Interbreed means to try and have kids. And fertile means that you can have kids. So fertile offspring means that your offspring, your children, are able to also reproduce and have kids. So to suit this definition, I'll use an example. So for example, if you have lions, a bunch of lions there, and a male and a female comes together and they make children, their children will be able to have children, right? You can imagine, otherwise we won't see lions in nature, because that means once one dies, it's over. No, they're able to make kids and reproduce, right? And we know their children are fertile because their children has children. So an example of two things that are not the same species would be, for example, a lion and a tiger. If you have a lion and you have a tiger and they decide to interbreed, their child will be infertile. Infertile, meaning that their child cannot have kids. So even though, and this immediately shows that they're not the same species, okay? Although they can have a kid, see, they will have a kid. A lion and a tiger can interbreed and they can produce offspring. The key word here is they can produce fertile offspring. They will produce infertile offspring. So they will make something called a liger. They will make ligers. A lion and a tiger make a liger. See, it's like a lion that has like stripes like a tiger. But these ligers will not be able to have kids. They are infertile. Okay? So there are many examples of this. There are many creatures that had interbred. They tried to have kids, but their kids were infertile, and this includes liger, wolfen. This is a whale and a dolphin. Obviously, they are different species. So if these different species come together, they will make something that can't have a kid, and that's a wolfen. There's also a mule, a kama. A kama, by the way, is like a llama and a camel. Now, so it's a very easy definition. A species is just anything two organisms that can reproduce, and their kids will be able to have kids. And in a nutshell, that's just any creature that looks alike, like a lion and a lion, an elephant and an elephant, a giraffe and a giraffe. Those are all the same species. Okay, so let's move on to the next word here. Population. Okay, this is where it gets more simple. The species is honestly the hardest definition. So population is any group of species living in a certain environment. So it's a group of organisms of the same species who live in the same area at the same time. So for example, say we look back there in the mountains and we see a pack of lions. That would be a population because they are the same species and they live in the same area at the same time. But if we were to look back here, for example, and see a bunch of lions mixed with a bunch of leopards, that would not be a population because they're not the same species. There's more than one species there. What we would actually call that is when there's more than one species living in a certain area, that would be a community. Okay? So a community is like a group of populations. Remember, a population is when a group of the same species is living somewhere. Now, if there's a group of the same species living somewhere along with another group of a different species, that would be like a community. You're not the same species, but they're living in the same place. So for example, this is like a community. You can see there's a whole bunch of, let's say, what's that? That's zebras, a whole bunch of zebras, a whole bunch of elephants and giraffes living in the same area. So that therefore it's not the same species, but so it'd rather be called a community, okay? Because there's a whole bunch of different species. Now the last important word is, I would say, ecosystem. Now, ecosystem is, in formal definition, a community and its abiotic environment. So this image right here represents an ecosystem. We have a community because there's a whole bunch of different populations living together along with the environment, right? We got the sun, we got the fields, rocks, everything. That's the environment. So that's all an ecosystem is. So up here again, this is an example of an ecosystem because it's the living things and the abiotic environment. Oh yeah, the abiotic environment, by the way, just so if you don't know, abiotic means non-living. So for example, an abiotic environment will be something like, oh yeah, I'll just try and make this bigger here because this is important. You need to know what abiotic means. So abiotic factors are things like sunlight, rocks. Abiotic just means non-living. Anything in this picture that is non-living, that would be considered abiotic, because biotic means living, abiotic means non-living. So that'd be things like the sunlight, that's not living, this rock, it's not living. All the plants are living, by the way. Like, doesn't, like, it may not be as obvious, but they're living. It would be all the things like sunlight, rock, water, the pH of the water, how much water there is, the type of soil you can find. Those are all abiotic factors. So therefore an ecosystem would be all the living things and all the abiotic factors involved that I mentioned here, this list. So yeah, coming back to this picture, so you can see there's so many different kinds of ecosystems, and each ecosystem is different because it has a different environment, different abiotic factors, and different communities, different creatures that live specifically in that specific area, like the snow, like the desert, like the water, like people, even us, right? So that's the whole idea of ecology. Like, we're getting into this idea briefly of what it really is. Now this was, for example, for this one, this was just part one. For the next video, because I don't want to make it too long, the video, I will go into more detail specifically regarding, oh, here we go, regarding how you can group species into different kinds of things, but we'll get there for the next video. Just want to see if in terms of abiotic factors, there is more than these. So these are not the only ones. Other abiotic factors could come to your mind, but I may not have listed here, so don't be limited to only these abiotic factors. And stay tuned for the next video, and I hope this helped.